today. I'm really pleased that so many people could join us again for a new program. So last year we had Silver Linings, and this year we're having reNEWed. So welcome. So this forum allows us to connect with other museum educators and public programmers. And this year we're planning to, as well as talking about the impact of COVID, to expand on some different ideas about education in our institutions and how we all enact it. So the housekeeping was good. So also I encourage you to submit lots of questions and your ideas, of course, for other programs that we might run. We're recording this program, so if people could please keep their microphone muted unless they're talking. If you do have something to say, it's probably better actually to put it into the chat because we may not notice your hands up working across a number of screens. And we'd love for you, of course, to join the conversation with us online on the website. So on amaganv.com.au.org and on Facebook, of course. So thank you. So to get started, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're meeting today. And for me, it's the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. And I pay my respects to their spirits, ancestors, elders and community members past and present. I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people who might be joining us today or watching on the video later. And I invite you to acknowledge the traditional owners of your lands that you're on by putting their name into the shared chat window. So thank you. So I'm Christine Healy, I'm the NV President. And we've, like I said before, we've enjoyed bringing our Silver Linings programs to you last year. And this year, like I said, we're doing reNEWed. So I'd like to say that NV is a volunteer organisation as part of AMAGA. And I encourage you to formally join us by adding the Education Network to your AMAGA membership or connect with us by following us on our website and on social media as well. So thank you. Now, recently there was Ian Watts is going to say a few words about the Patricia Mcdonald bequest and Patricia's work for museum education. So I'll hand it over to you, Ian. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. I was alerted to an article in the Sydney Morning Herald on the 24th of February by a former member of what is now NV, and then I followed it up by looking at the new media release from the Australian Museum. So I'll just read a para from that. The life-changing power of a bequest was recognised today when the Australian Museum officially opened the Patricia Mcdonald Education Rooms in honour of the former education officer who died in 2018 at 89 years. Patricia Mcdonald worked in education at the Australian Museum for 35 years, commencing in 1953 at the age of 24 years, and pioneered new ways of learning, which influenced the way museum education developed here and around the world. The bequest of over 7 million, the largest received in the Australian Museum's history, was made by Patricia Mcdonald to the Foundation to support lifelong learning, especially for young people. And for those of you who are new or relatively new to NV or its antecedents, Patricia Mcdonald was actually the founding president of the National Education Network, which began at a UNESCO seminar in Adelaide. And in its final session on the 14th of March, coincidence with today's date very close by, a recommendation was carried that a national association of those interested in museum education be formed to encourage the development of new education programs, to carry out research, to sponsor the holding of regular conferences and the publication of a journal or newsletter. So I've been in touch with some of the original committee members and shared the information about Patricia's bequest. She was a major force, not just in New South Wales, where she'd started an education group in 1971. But of course, our group began in 1974, just prior to the national network, which began in 1975 as the Museum Education Association of Australia. Those of you who would like to know more about it, you can research, it'll come up. So that's enough said, but it was a major bequest, and it's a very exciting development for the Australian Museum.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ian. Yeah, it was quite incredible. She must have really scrimped and saved to be on a museum educator's salary and to have left the significant amount that she did. So it's pretty impressive. Thank you. And I'll hand you over to Michelle now, my colleague.
Thanks, Christine. Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Keogh from the National Trust. I'm the Education Manager at the National Trust, and I'll be facilitating today's program. So I get the fun task of introducing everyone and letting them do all the talking. So the easy gig. Today, first up in our first session of reNEWed for 2021, we have Stephanie Rowstone, who is the Engagement Learning and Programs Manager at National Wool Museum, and she's going to talk to us about the summary results of a recent survey that was distributed. So I will pass you over to Stephanie. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Hopefully a few of you saw the survey that was put out. We sent it around in a few different means, inviting people to share what their plans were for school program this year. So the survey went out in January. So most of the results were received and collated in January, with a few later ones. So it will be interesting to look at this, I think, for all of us to reflect upon perhaps what our plans were and what has changed in that time. Thanks, Michelle. So the main purpose of the survey was for us to understand how different people and different organisations were adapting to the COVID environment. And as it says there, so we had 14 responses in total. So all but one were planning to offer facilitated on-site programs for schools in term 1. So it might be interesting, should have thought to add a survey, that would have been good to find out what people are doing now, but perhaps people can share in the chat too whether they're running school programs and whether these results match up with what they're doing. But we can step through to the next slide. So one of the focuses of the survey was on safety measures and adjustments to programs around being COVID safe. So half, as you can see with there, we're reducing or limiting the group size of groups coming in at once, removing hands-on materials or changing the types of materials to be more COVID safe. Obviously, a lot of schools were either allowing only one school per day or one school at a time, and then additional booking amendment cancellations and clauses, and some people reduced facilities. So there was quite a range of different methods and processes that were implemented, and I think that's been one of the really interesting revelations from this survey, is that different people have adapted in different ways, which might be based on the type of institution they're working in, or we did have a response from at least one organisation that was outside, like a parks and gardens sort of environment. So that obviously differed, but also the individual requirements of the organisation and expectations and so on. We can go to the next one. So cleaning was a topic that came up, and we looked at some of the details about how that was being managed. So almost everyone was cleaning after every group, and a large portion had acknowledged, obviously, that that required additional staff time or additional staff to support that, and that was being put in place as well. About half there were putting designated spaces to stand and deliver so that there was set distancing, infection control training and face masks required, although a reminder, this was done back in January for most people, so that requirement may have changed for some people. Thanks. As part of the survey, we also looked at online experiences, noting that a number of us last year developed new online learning experiences or new ways to deliver learning programs remotely. And so there was an interesting question about what online programs were being offered. So 86% of people were saying that they will be offering online experiences, and some are increasing, some are reducing, some are offering the same sort of programs, which would be interesting, I think, to discuss how that relates to resourcing and priorities of the institution that we're in, because I imagine that would affect the results. And we also asked about pricing, and you can see there that there's quite a range. So quite a few were charging. Some are not, and some are adding a charge now this year, but we're offering it free last year. And there's quite a range in the types of charges. So again, that might be an interesting point of discussion at the end if we have time to look at how schools are responding to that. And I think that's part of the hopefully the outcome of this session today is that we can learn a bit from each other about how schools are responding to these changes in environments and how we are adapting as things change. So I think that's the main section from me. If anyone had any particular questions at this point in time, you're welcome to ask. Otherwise, I think that will lead in quite well to us talking about how that looks on the ground and what people have been doing to manage groups in their organisations.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. So we are having, the chat is going, there are contributions in the chat with people letting us know what they're doing from different organisations. We've got Christine saying at ACME that they are doing bubble visits and that they're also not opening to the general public 2 days per week to allow for school programming only. So that's for term 1 at the moment. May say multi-schools in term 2, single schools per day for term 1. And Christine's mentioning that she's delivering virtual lessons, but take-up has dropped off, and we're experiencing similar at the National Trust. Even though we're offering our virtual programs that we scrambled to develop last year, there hasn't really been uptake. Yeah, so I'm sure everyone's keeping up with the chat going on up there. But thank you, Stephanie, for summarising those survey results and for taking the initiative for putting that survey together on behalf of MV. It was really good. So as we're meeting today, we're really talking about how our sector is adapting and how we are changing our programs to be from hands-on engagement to hands-off engagement. But I think since we first initiated this idea for this session, even the COVID safe restrictions have changed. So a lot of the practices we were thinking we're going to be implementing for this time for our school programming aren't as necessary hands-off as we initially thought they would need to be. So we're going to just now talk about pedagogies for today's museum educators. And so I'm going to pass over to Christine Healy, Christine is the NV president, but she's also curator, education and community learning at Incinerator Gallery. So she's going to talk about her understandings of effective pedagogy for museum and gallery context. So thank you, Christine.
That's okay, thank you very much. That was really interesting, Stephanie, thank you. So today's museum educator juggles the demands of a range of stakeholders, and many have contrasting interests. And first and foremost are the requirements of the museums of the workplace that we work in, whereby, as researchers and my experience has found, is that management may or may not be concerned or even aware of the challenges that we face within our roles. So as such, our museum pedagogies are constantly under pressure to adapt and demonstrate flexibility. And as with contemporary education pedagogies, the students frequently considered to be at the centre of learning, which if we look at this quote, I love starting with a quote. This is one of my favourite books. Art and culture historian Marianne Stanoweski points out that museums are meaning-making institutions that shape, define and instruct how to think through their displays and presentation. So we've got our idea as educators and who we're trying to work with, and the institution has their own idea by the way that they display and set up the museums. And I was also thinking about, you know, this idea of museums not being neutral, that museums are actually highly political in the way that they present and share information within institutions that we're needing to work with. So, and within our constitutions, and particularly in art museums, it's often the artworks and the curatorial discourse that's regarded as the priority. And so this can leave educators feeling a little bit at odds with the institutions and museums and galleries as they attempt to open up the process of meaning making about art and objects to generate a learner-centred environment with students that we're working with, which is why we're looking at sort of, you know, do we do hands-on, what sort of activities, how do we engage our learners? So in addition though to the museum priorities, our concerns are also focused on the diverse and sometimes conflicting needs of the students, their teachers, the education department, curriculum management bodies, and other education-related professionals that we might come into contact with over the course of our work. So have you had a chance to look at that? Okay. So what's on your mind? That's okay. What's on our mind when a class visits? And so I was thinking about some of the things while we're standing there waiting for our students to arrive. Will they arrive on time? Have they been to the bathroom? Will they need to go to the bathroom? Do we need to allow time for that? Is it going to cut into their tour time? You know, what am I going to have to drop off because I don't have as long for them? Where are their bags going to go? What should they bring and keep? Do they need to bring notepads? Can they leave their phones in their bags? Are their bags going to be safe? How do we assure them that their objects are all going to be okay? Will the booking information correlate with the group that actually presents itself? So the information that I've used to prepare for what I think that they're going to want to look at on this tour, is that going to match up with who they are when they've arrived? Have the teachers' expectations changed? I know sometimes I used to get lots of teachers, that one teacher that would make the booking and then a different teacher turn up on the day, or that teacher had come for an independent visit between that time and have decided on something completely different that they want the students to experience, that you're having to think, well, what do I do now? Managing the logistics. So if you've got students that are divided up into groups, who's going to be where, and is the teacher going to be with the group, or, you know, managing volunteers and other people and making sure that there's a steady flow throughout the space to make sure that, you know, everyone gets to see everything. Thinking about, well, what do students already know about a subject? So you've got an idea in your mind about what it is that you're wanting to present, and you need to find out what it is that they already know is something that you need to determine really quickly. Finding out what their expectations are. So what do they think, what do students think is going to happen when they're on an excursion? Then introducing them to museum literacies and the conditions of entry, the things that they can and can't do, which in an art museum can be really anxiety inducing when you're standing really close to very precious artworks that, you know, don't have other people there, or you have to negotiate with security guards and other people who might come and intrude on that. Not to mention the other people that come and watch while you do your tour because they like what the kids are being told. Working out what type of class they are. Like, is this going to be a talkative, chatty class, or do I have to keep them quiet? How am I going to engage them and encourage them to talk in the moments that I want them to? And how can they share? What's the best context for them to share their responses? They might not have ever talked about art before and need support in how to do that. You're having to decide that very, very quickly. Working out what your tour path is going to be and what you're going to include. If you're starting to pick up some of their interests already, you're starting to think about, well, what's what's my flexibility here? What can I do within those contexts that's going to interest them? Thinking about your curriculum link. So I guess by this point down the list, you've kind of forgotten about the curriculum and what activities you're going to do. Ensuring their behaviour is positive all the way through, that they're doing the right thing in the spaces. At the same time, checking in with the teacher to make sure that this is what you wanted, isn't it? You know, this is the material, the information. And that's before you even start your tour. You're deciding, you're making all of these decisions really, really quickly. And so it involves having an understanding of the cues that determine these interactions with students, when an educator should speak, when as an educator should you listen, when should you be quiet, when should you allow silence, when should you apply pressure for responses, or when to scaffold and support for the optimum answers and responses. And it's tacit knowledge that we have that's intuitively known to us as experienced educators, that we can just sum it up like that, even with students that we've never met before. Exploration, inquiry and questioning about meaning making and representation of artworks and objects that are underlined by the students' own experience of the world that they live in is what drives all of our pedagogical choices and decisions. And this sticky area between competing priorities and ideologies for enacting education in the art museum is posited by museum educators and researchers who say that the fluidity exists between providing an aesthetic experience or didactic information. And museum educators' attempts to handle these conflicting values is what is a delicate and important balancing act, contributing towards the role of continuing to deserve, or what some theorists have said is an uncertain profession, because people don't see these things that we're doing and we don't explain very well because they're happening so tacitly and within our, within ourselves, they're within our decision making. We don't often share them with other people. Other people don't know these are the processes that we go through in order to be able to have a tour and to think about, and then to start thinking about, well, what pedagogy is going to be useful for us in working with different students. And that's a values-based decision based upon what it is that you as the educator think is important and valuable, that the students or that your learners are going to get the most out of the experience. So in 2005, at the American National Art Education Association conference, an museum educator and academic, David Ebbets, devised a list of the most popular theories that informed art museum educators' practice. And we've got a list on the next slide that notes the different pedagogies in order from most to least popular that get used or referred to in art museum education. So there's all these different strategies that we can draw on for being able to, share artworks and share our museums and institutions and the material, the content, information about artists with our learners. He did find, however, that the theories were devised for ideal learners and didn't take into account emerging research into visitor engagement at museums. And so museum educators still remain challenged to build theories and pedagogies that align curriculum theory to the objects. Ebbets suggested that object disciplines, individual, society and context were the cruxes that we could build a museum education theory that would be helpful for us. And this is also starting to lean towards alternate pedagogies for social justice and emancipatory pedagogies, where we're trying to, which engage students' critical thinking, and that we get them to express ideas, and that we get them to think about the world in different ways to what they came in with. But like I said, this is all values laden and is up to us as educators what we think is important. So on the next slide, we've got an engagement spectrum. So often with all these different competing interests in my head, when I would be walking around the museum and I'd be encouraging students to say what they thought and support their ideas and responses and feelings about artworks, I I would often dread that a curator would walk past and they would hear me encouraging students to say what they wanted to, you know, what was on their minds, that I wasn't just sharing the curatorial knowledge that had been, you know, that I've meant to have digested and be able to explain to them exactly what exhibitions were all about. So I think that it remains like this invisible practice that we do, that we need to learn to talk more about. And this was what the crux of my research project was. So in the States, some of the philanthropic organisations are, they're leading this change in the way that we engage with students and the general public. That rather than people that come to museums be very passive and just listen, which there's a whole underlying politics to that and the way people expect to behave when they go to a museum, because as adults we don't want to be challenged, but as young people are coming up through systems, they're wanting to express their ideas and say different things, and us as educators and public programmers need to keep abreast of that, but we also need to learn how to take our institutions with us on that journey, that it can't just be us and the institution or us versus the institution. We need to find a way to do it all together. So this organisation in the States came up with this involvement spectrum, where at one level you've got people that are just spectating, which is, you know, a very curatorial kind of model, all the way over to where the audience is an artist and people are co-creating work. So we can see that there's different ways of doing it, and the purpose of this report was to try and encourage people to consider different ways of engagement. And they were funding projects that engaged people in the way that had more community outcomes and built people's critical and creative thinking skills rather than just delivering information, which was also where VTS came out of as well, because that was looking at ways for people to build knowledge within museums and institutions rather than just be supplied with information. So it kind of goes back to like what I started with about people's perceptions about what we do, and keeping in mind the competing interests that we meet. If we go to the next slide, I really like these kind of slides. This is what people think I do. This is what my friends think I do. This is what I do. I need to make one for museum education. And so this idea of what it is that we do and these decisions that we make, they're invisible and they're tacit. And we need to get better at being able to, including me, we need to get better at being able to talk about them and share them and promote what we do, because I think that there's a lot at risk if we're not able to do this, and instead people were replaced by presenters in museums who just deliver material and don't have the flexible thinking and adaptability to be able to make all the different decisions that I talked about on the slide before. So that's not so much about COVID, but it's a little bit about pedagogy and where my thinking has been about pedagogy for the last 10 years. So I hope that I've seen that people are putting conversations and comments in, so I look forward to reading them and hope that there's some questions later and that some of what I've just had to say has resonated with you or for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. That was really interesting, and I'm sure people do have contributions that they want to make and probably want to extend on this conversation further. We will have time at the end to pick up on the discussions and open up to everyone so that you can all contribute, and if there were themes that resonated with you, you can definitely pick up on those points at the end of this all. There have been comments in the chat, people contributing about and relating to different aspects of what you spoke, Christine, so it's probably easy if you go back and read them all. But a copy of the involvement spectrum would be great for everyone, but I do believe we will be providing a copy of the whole presentation for access for everyone to refer to as it's being recorded, so you will all get a copy of that.
Yeah, Andrew's shared a link to it in the, oh no, a letter of participation, a different spectrum.
A similar model, yeah. Thanks.
I'll get the link and
Andrew. But hearing you talk about that exhaustive list of our competing interests and versus what that perception that maybe people within the organisation or wider communities would have of what we do, it was quite overwhelming hearing. It's like that mental load that we all carry, especially we hear that mental load as a mother. It's all that additional stuff that we just bring to the role that isn't properly acknowledged often. So it's really great that you've captured that, Christine. Thank you. So now we're going to talk about how we're making our museum experiences COVID safe and still having that pedagogy in play and having engagement of our students for our activities. And to talk further about that is May Lu. May is the education program producer for STEM for Museums Victoria Science Works, and she's going to step in last minute amazingly to replace Alice Barnes, who is very sorry that she can't join us this afternoon as she's unwell. So May, thank you very much for stepping in last minute and for what you're about to share. So I'll pass over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. As Michelle mentioned, I'm mainly based at ScienceWorks, but ScienceWorks is part of the larger organisation Museums Victoria, which also encompasses Melbourne Museum and the Immigration Museum. And I can see in the participants at this meeting that I do have some of my colleagues from Melbourne Museum and the public programs team at ScienceWorks, and also from our outreach division as well. So I'll mainly be sharing about ScienceWorks adaptations, but towards the end I'll comment a little bit about what's been happening, especially over at Melbourne Museum. And if some of my outreach colleagues want to jump in to add anything, please do so at the end. So big question, how does a very, very hands-on museum like ScienceWorks adapt to being hands-off, but continuing to engage and have audience interaction? So you can see from this slide, our exhibitions are very hands-on, lots of touch points, lots of touch screens, buttons, random bits and pieces that visitors will handle. We have an early years section for babies to 5-year-olds where everything goes in mouths. What happens to that in a COVID safe environment? If you go to the next slide. In about 2016, we moved to having very hands-on and participatory focused education programs, workshops that run for about an hour. And some of these are very, very, very hands-on, as you can see, bits of vegetables being poked to determine their conductivity, bits of Play-Doh that's being mashed. What do we do in a COVID safe environment when our programs are centered around handling things, feeling different materials, examining the properties of different materials, about conductivity of the human skin, etc. What do we do? Traditionally, we've had a lot of show-based education, if you go to the next slide. And these include volunteer moments that are also very touch-focused as well. Visitors come up and they handle things, they touch this Van de Graaff generator, and their hair stands up. What do we do when this is no longer really COVID safe? So one of the ways we've approached this, like many of you, we've tried to adapt by producing virtual education programs. So if you go to the next slide, please. We spent the first lockdown, the first part of the pandemic, producing units of resources for teachers across sciences, STEM, humanities, and we release these, I think, on a weekly basis with each education officer or education program producer releasing one with a video introduction and a series of activities each week. Then in the second lockdown, we started producing some virtual education programs. So for us at ScienceWorks, that was adapting some of our most popular programs to being presented virtually in an interactive show format. And this went through many, many different iterations, depending on whether the presenter was on site at ScienceWorks, as you can see in this picture, or presenting from home. Whether the students were individually logging on from at home, or if they were logging on together as a class. And so each different version had its own rules for presenting, and whether there was someone else, another presenter or staff member, organising the Zoom call and what we call teching. So we've had to adapt in many ways, even for the on-site presentation. This is our setup that we kind of put together as a makeshift TV studio on site. You can see we've got two screens, one where, this is where we've got 4 classes, and they're each zooming in as individual participants and one student from home. And then we've got our presenter on site at ScienceWorks. And this is the point of view from me as the tech person, and I'm navigating between different cameras and the slideshow. So one thing we did have to consider was the COVID safety between different presenters. So this is the blast off show. So there's still elements of interactivity where students are helping to count down to blast off. They're drawing what they think a rocket would look like before they see examples of real rockets that have been developed. And they're also participating in a moon moves dance. So there are some people in this audience, I think Biddy and Susan, who helped us write the moon moves song and the associated actions that went into it. So they're getting up and moving around as part of this show. But one of the demonstrations involves the presenter blowing up a balloon and then releasing it to imitate the way that a rocket moves. So as you can see, I don't know if you could see, there's this machine in front, but we realized it really wasn't COVID safe for a balloon to be put in a presenter's mouth and then having it flip-flop around and spraying saliva everywhere. So, part of the COVID safety is just recognizing that there's also someone else in the room and, there's the potential to spray saliva everywhere. And so we've got this mechanized balloon pump. So it's, simple things like this that we have to think about as well. I don't know what else I wanted to say about that, but yeah, just in terms of cleaning between various presenters, sanitizing, and that's what we think about for our virtual programs. But I'll go to the next 2 slides. I'm mainly talking from an education perspective, but I do recognize that there are some smaller venues, smaller museums and galleries where you have the one person who does everything. You do exhibitions and public programs and education. So I actually did ask around to our exhibitions and public programs teams about how they have managed as we have reopened. So everything working for, Victorian government, state government, everything requires a COVID safety plan and risk assessment. And that's, everyone from our exhibitions team, public programs team, education team, we've all had to think very carefully about how we're delivering our programs and exhibition services. So exhibitions, they have said in a shorthand way, we're doing everything that supermarkets are doing and more. So they said, there's signage about contact tracing. Well, you don't have contact tracing at the supermarkets, but we've got contact tracing for both staff and visitors. They have visitor flow diagrams in tight spaces where there can't be social distancing. There's distancing signage and there's also capacity signage for each area. Like some of you have mentioned in the comments, we have cancelled our cloakroom service for both school groups and general public. We have really increased the cleaning that we do. We already did daily, I think twice daily cleaning, but now I think it's hourly cleaning and sanitizing of our high touch points within the exhibition, which is pretty much everything is a high touch point. There's a daily deep clean of exhibitions with a lot of touch points, even more touch points. And we actually bought a dishwasher or a washing machine to clean loose parts. And then because that's doing a deep clean each day, so these loose parts are kind of sanitized and washed every day. And so there's like, I think there are two sets each day. There are plenty of exhibits which ask you to like put your eye up to it or put your ear up to it to hear. So those exhibits have been temporarily deactivated. Our public programs team have done an amazing job with trying to move our visitors around the site a little bit more so they're not all clustered in the same area, and especially move them outside. We have this beautiful, great big arena at ScienceWorks in front of the historic Spotswood pumping station. So our team have created an outdoor scavenger hunt that focuses on different areas of ScienceWorks in the playground. And we've created a maze. We've basically just mowed a maze at a labyrinth in the grass to allow people to get out and move around. But they need to go around with pencils and sheets of paper. And what do you do with those pencils? Because we don't want them to just take them all away. So they actually go in quarantine for about a week before they're allowed to be used again. And they also, open up like a treasure chest and collect a thing which they swap for a token. So the thing that they collect is also quarantined as well. Ambitiously, we recently ran Little Kids Week In. So normally every month we close the museum to education bookings for one day, usually on a Monday, but we get complaints like, oh, why is it always on a Monday? Can you have it for the whole week? So we do have it for the whole week, Little Kids Week In, and that's for children before school age, so under the age of 5. And in one of the activities, they use these little robots called Caterpillars. And so we just made sure that there was no equipment sharing. So each child used one particular device for the extent of the program, and there was a sanitization station. Next slide, please. So from an education perspective, we have, for term 1, we have a fixed program where we do still allow general public on site, but because the school program has them moving through dedicated venues like the Lightning Room and the Planetarium, or moving around the venue with the scavenger hunt, they have very little interaction with the public. We have something that's a bit controversial that not every venue does, which is that we actually ask each education group for a contact tracing list, which includes their details, contact details, and that's kept securely, I think, for 28 days. We haven't had many school groups complain so far, only one. So for the shows, we've actually, which applies for both public program shows for general public and education shows for education groups, we traditionally relied on volunteer moments where we choose one audience member to come up and try something and show that to the whole audience. But our team has done a great job of converting these volunteer moments to whole audience interaction, like a game show style, or everyone thumbs up, or do like this, cross your arms for no, or other ways of getting the whole audience to interact rather than having one person up to touch something. Between presenters with sanitizing equipment, what has taken up a lot of time is cleaning the planetarium seats between shows. But yeah, with our rostering, it's become a little bit easier, but still something we're working around. What was harder was that when we first reopened, we couldn't have people queuing in the foyer area because the capacity, the total area wasn't big enough to have that many people. So yeah, it was a bit crazy for a while, but I think we're okay. And the venue capacity has increased now as well. For the ed workshops, which are really quite hands-on, we chose not to have any workshops in term 1. So the set program only involved Planetarium and Lightning Room show, the exhibition, the scavenger hunt. But term 2, we will be offering 2 education workshops. One of them is robots and coding, which you can see, and the other one is roller coaster engineer, which has students designing their own roller coaster and testing the physics behind their creations. And, you know, to you that might sound like it's still high touch, and it is, but of the ones that we have, they are the lowest touch and the most easy to clean, because, you know, you can sanitize the devices and ask students to sanitize their hands before and after the session. And might just have to rethink those Lego blocks, but I'm still working on it. From my colleagues at Melbourne Museum and the Immigration Museum, whose programs are very object-based, they have replaced objects that can't easily be cleaned. So things like taxidermy and you know, other program props that, you know, a heritage or can't be cleaned easily. One of the biggest debates at the moment is for the Learning Lab at Melbourne Museum about headphones. How can we use headphones in term 2? Because as students move around to round robin stations, or they're each in their groups listening to some content, they were using headphones. But I think they're still working on the solution, but they're possibly thinking about asking students to bring their own, especially for secondary audiences, and also providing a bunch of single-use ones that students can then take with them. But then again, you know, many devices these days need a different dongle, a USB-C adapter to a USB-C to headphone jack adapter, because a lot of devices don't have earphone jacks anymore, which is really annoying. I do see in the audience that we have some, sorry, not in the audience, in the chat today, that we have some people from the Transport Education Centre on site at Melbourne Museum, Road to Zero. And there was a comment from one of the educators there that with their touchscreen devices like iPads, etc., there's been advice that students have to use styluses. They've also had to put away VR, virtual reality, with the goggles. So instead, they've got a QR code that's linked to the same 360-degree video that students can just view on their own devices. I think Leanne is here. Maybe, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. But yeah, I'd be open to some questions if anyone has any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, May, for your insight into how your programming has been adapted and how the organisation at the different sites have responded to making, you know, the activities COVID safe and still engaging. So yeah, if we do want to open it up for everyone to contribute now, I will stop the share. And there have been some comments, but I'll let you read them because these seem to be mainly around people putting their input in on what they've also been doing on site. So I'll let you read that in your own time. So if anyone else wants to contribute or bring up some additional themes that they want to raise or add to anything that has been pertinent to them along the way. But I think, May, your journey definitely reflects many of our organisations and how we've had to adapt and respond, and then adapt and respond again as the COVID situation regularly changes and that fluid nature of it all. So thank you.
And we're still adapting and responding as you all are as well. And you know, my fear is that I'll spend a good week on writing up the COVID safety plan for term 2, and by term 2, either, touch wood, we're in lockdown again, or it'll have opened up so much that this COVID planning won't matter as much. But yeah, I guess that's just the way it is.
It is, and we just had our TRAs approved by the HSE committee only to go into the snap lockdown again for all of that to be no longer up to date. So there definitely is a need to be fluid at the moment. So that's unmute, and May, you did ask some contributions from your colleagues. So if anyone would like to add to what May said, that would be great.
Kate's from our public programs team. She manages our public programs team at ScienceWorks. You're talking about interactivity in online activities, Kate.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, like, this is kind of a whole new world for everyone, isn't it? And you know, I think even like before COVID, sort of webinars were a bit of a thing. They've become a lot more popular now. But you know, just trying to figure out ways to do really like effective engagement and interaction online. Like interactivity is just such a key part of what we do and our philosophy at ScienceWorks. And you know, Zoom polls are great. I love them because of how easy they are. And you know, even as an audience member, I'm, you know, when a Zoom poll pops up, I'm like, oh, great, I get to add my little bit of, you know, my opinion or whatever. But yeah, we've been experimenting with other ways, you know, just that sort of fairly straightforward, getting the audience to do an activity with us. So, you know, you get your bottle of water and your glass and your piece of paper and, you know, here you go, put this there and that there, and so they can do it themselves. But I'm also like investigating some of the other like technical possibilities. There's getting to be more of them online. I'm just having a mind blank about the names of some of them, but where you can have, you know, people like entering words to form a word cloud, or, you know, put their dot on a map as to where they're from, that kind of thing. It's just seeing the chat breakout spaces are good for the, you know, if you've got a small enough group that you can do that. Yes, difficult for kids. Anyway, I've been having a lot of fun thinking about how to do that and interested in other people's ideas. So I'm going to have a look at the chat now.
Just on what Kate was saying, I've been doing some Zooms with the History Council, and they're finding that Zoom is actually increasing their reach, because a lot of the small country museums that have got 2 or 3 people tops and aren't going to travel 4 hours to come down to Melbourne for a 1-hour meeting are now participating. So I think from our point of view, Zooms are great because we can all get together, and we haven't got to worry about getting across town by 4 o'clock when your doors close at 3 and things like that. So, you know, I think these are good for us. I think we need to look at ways of taking that out to our client base as well.
Yeah, Ian, a lot of the chat group is acknowledging and agreeing with what you're saying, and Envy particularly has found that we've had a greater reach and participation in our events with our Silver Linings experience. That's why we've continued doing this platform going into the reNEWed series. I saw one of those Twitter posts the other day saying that the biggest winner out of the COVID experience is the QR code. Never did they think they would have such a platform. So it's interesting what technologies we end up having to use and what becomes pertinent in different settings.
Michelle, at the Shrine, we've actually put QR codes outside now as well, which we've never had external interpretation before. And for that exact reason, we've placed about 20 QR codes around the Shrine Reserve on some of the statues and some of the memorial trees, so that people can understand a little bit more about what's inside, but also understand what's outside as well. So it's been slow, but you know, we hope that the engagement with those will continue. So that's been a result of COVID, of course.
That's fantastic, Sue.
Can I ask the question? Who's doing all the cleaning? Is it the education staff or is it other people? I'm asking May, I think.
So galleries are being cleaned by our cleaning contractor, and then the equipment for shows and programs are being cleaned by presenting staff and educators. So whoever was using it last, we clean it for the next person. And the planetarium seats as well is being cleaned by the presenter. I don't know if we provide moisturizer, but I think we should. I think a hand sanitizer might be moisturizing, Andrew. His question was, what moisturizer do you use on your hands afterwards?
Yeah, we have a program, it's I'm only CRTing at Sovereign Hill, but it basically involves the kids handling money. And so all of that money has been turned into plastic basically, and we have to clean every one of them after every bubble. It is a pain in the bum.
It's true with the exhibition items that there's lots of bits and pieces and super hands-on. They've had to have the materials replaced with ones that can be thrown in that washing machine or be able to be cleaned, because the cloth ones just wouldn't handle. Oh, it wasn't the cloth ones. Some of the ones couldn't be cleaned.
Yes, Andrew, the ball bearings are cleaned as well. Not individually though.
Yeah, and Andrew's also acknowledged that you're doing money laundering.
Sorry. Oh, money laundering, yeah. Okay, not bad, not bad. Yeah. One of the other things I think is happening at Sovereign Hill is that a lot of programs are being taken outside as much as possible. And the unfortunate thing is that they're becoming a walk and talk to some extent, and I don't know how sustainable that is and how long that's going to happen, but I just can't wait till, kids can touch things again. So, I'm hoping that's going to happen next term, but I don't know what everyone's mail is on that, what's everyone's feeling? Is it going to change?
Pete, on that, I spoke to Sophia earlier today, and she did say that in the programs that they have adapted the components outside, that because they've got schools coming through now, it seems to be that the schools are more partial to that, or at least have really commented that they've been enjoying that experience. So I guess that's weather dependent on the amount of joy they get.
Sue? Your sound's not working.
Is that better?
That's better.
Got new headset. I was interested in your list of things that educators go through whilst they're waiting for schools to arrive and things to happen, and that's absolutely true. You're lightning fast, going whiz, whiz, whiz. The other thing, as you probably recall from here, that we deal with, and I put it in the chat, was the challenge of engaging students when they've already been at potentially 2 other really deeply interesting and rich places. Do you have any thoughts on that? How you might, what are some tips that you might apply for that situation?
Was that for me?
No, it was probably for you. Oh, well, May can answer if she'd like.
Yeah. Well, that's where you want to use pedagogies that are interactive for students, that they get to have a say about what they're experiencing and thinking about, instead of talking at them, to make sure that, they're able to talk about what the experience feels like for them, what they're seeing, what they're noticing, pointing things out to them to try and get them to interact, intellectually with the objects.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was pretty hard. I remember that at the shrine, when you get a really, really tired group and you try and sit them down a lot as much as you could as well, just so they could have a rest while you're walking around.
Yeah.
So trying to find places within your museum where there's room for 20 kids to sit down, that can be a challenge. I know often I would ask for an artwork to be put somewhere that I'd be able to take a group of students to it, and it would be put, right next to something that was really precious, or in a tiny little corridor, or where you couldn't actually talk to it. I know, anyway, I won't tell tales. So yeah, I mean, they're just the practical things, and it's really interesting listening to everybody talk and the questions and comments, because they're the really practical things that we're all really concerned about and worried if we're doing the right thing or not. And there's not clear messaging from the education department about what the expectations and requirements are. And so we're all left making it up. And so some people are doing, overshooting, and then other people, are kind of just doing what they think is the minimum. And because we're all making it up and not sure, you're left unsure. And so it's been really good today to hear different people's responses to what it is that they're doing, just to because everything with COVID has become, like, everything in the world is just really prickly and uncomfortable and hard now. We don't know when the next lockdown's going to be. We don't know. There's so much that's unknown. It's just made everything in life difficult and harder and kind of abrasive. And that's super stressful. So it's really important that we take care of ourselves and take advantage of these opportunities to hear from other people about what they're doing. So I hope the next program, Envy program that we have, that everyone's feeling a bit more chatty, and, you know, we can continue the conversation and talk about the issues that are really important to us, because I really do think that there's a lot at stake if we don't advocate for our professions over the next few years. We've seen what's happened in the States with so many people losing their jobs as a result of COVID, you know, and I don't think that we're completely immune from that. So our next, Michelle, do you want to talk about the next one? Or will I talk about
I was just going to, you know, it's great. I was just going to, sorry, I was just going to mention that I think one thing that's really highlighted for me today is how we do come in with our very own specialised set of skills that we bring to the role, and it's great to celebrate that as a collective group. So please keep joining us, because it's so nice to have this collegiality and the connection between us as GLAM sector educators. So our next topic is teaching tough topics. Christine, do you want to elaborate on that, or?
Well, we're going to talk about how do you hold a difficult space with students when you talk about things that are emotional and are challenging and difficult and quite serious and earnest, and how can we hold that space with students in a way that is comfortable? And we're going to hear from some people that do teach about some particularly difficult subjects, and we hope that you can all join us for that as well, and let your colleagues know.
And here are our QR codes. So give yourself a scan and keep connected. And thank you so much for our presenters today and for all of you contributing. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.